Well, it's interesting. We're not, we're halfway through the rehearsals at the moment, and I think that it's hard to say. It's often quite hard to say who an audience is going to particularly latch onto or empathise with at this stage. But one thing I would say is the fact that, as we're working through it, it's absolutely fascinating to see how, perhaps my initial ideas about certain characters have changed once I've seen it up on its feet. And that a character who you might think at first glance shows a particularly strong character definition actually is more nuanced or more complex as a character than I felt when I first read it. And that's the great thing about this play, and the great thing about Shakespeare's writing is that in this structure and through sometimes some quite challenging language and through the structure of verse, predominantly verse, he creates these very complex and fascinating characters who show positive sides and less positive sides, like we all do. He writes very believable, very identifiable, to some degree, characters who we can all relate to. So in terms of empathy, I think that I hope that we would be able to empathise with everyone's journey in this play. If I had to choose one in particular who I think that our core audience might relate to, at this stage, I might say that it would be Jessica and Lorenzo, because they seem to me the sort of the youngest ones, the ones who've got their whole lives ahead of them and are making tough decisions very, very early on in the play and in their lives, and making decisions which will affect them for the rest of their lives. Jessica's decision to run away from her father and turn her back on her whole culture is a very courageous and very bold step. And what I find fascinating watching it as we get up on its feet is seeing how a decision which, as I said, is a very big one to make, how it affects her for the rest of the play. And actually by the end of the play, we've just started getting the last scene up on its feet. She's very silent as the characters talk about what's just happened and talk about having got all of Shylock's money and the deed which will allow Lorenzo and Jessica to inherit all Shylock's money once he dies. And Jessica is very noticeably silent in that. And I mean, there's a part of me which feels that, well, maybe she's been quite affected by hearing about what's happened to her father, that effectively he's been destroyed. And I'm interested to discover if that's had a bad effect on her or not. We have a scene where obviously Jessica runs away and is escapes with Lorenzo, and what actually we're doing in this production is, as opposed to reporting Shylock's reaction to finding that Jessica's run away, we're actually going to see that. We're experimenting with that. So there's a scene with Celerio and Solanio in the full text where they talk about Shylock's reaction to finding Jessica's gone, and actually we're going to see that. And I think it really helps. It certainly helps the actor playing the part of Shylock, I think, in terms of his journey, that he actually experiences that reaction. And then we then see him in the next scene talking to Tubal, and who he sent off to try and find Jessica. And then we have this fantastic scene where Tubal has to give him one bit of bad news after another, and it's very interesting seeing how he does that, because he balances it with good news about Antonio. And there's obviously, Shylock has been devastated by his daughter leaving, and then he discovers that his daughter's been spent all this money in one night, which is presumably very out of character for her, and then he hears that this ring, which Leah gave him when he was a bachelor. Now, we're not entirely sure who Leah is, but we might assume, and certainly what we've been talking about in rehearsal, is that Leah is probably, is Shylock's wife. And we've created a bit of a story as to what happened there, that she's no longer around and that possibly she died. And this ring is his one remembrance of her. So he's lost his daughter, huge amounts of money, and this piece of jewellery, which has huge sentimental value is so important to him, a link to the mother of his daughter, and his final link to his family is gone. And certainly we found it interesting to explore the idea that this is the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, that it's the final thing which pushes him over the edge to pursue the forfeit in the vehement way that he does in the next scene. And it's interesting because he talks about, she gave it to him when he was a bachelor. Maybe it was a love token, in the same way that the ring that Portia gives to Bassanio is a love token, and Gratiano is given by Nerissa, of course. A love token, and you have to swear that you'll never give it away, and if you do, there'll be big consequences and stuff. And it's the same thing, that if you imagine that scene going on between Lear and Shylock, a man who's very, who doesn't break an oath, and he's given this ring by Lear, perhaps, in a similar sort of scene as we see between Bassanio and Portia. And then this ring, which, he's lost now forever, has been given away for a monkey, for, worth nothing to him. It must have a big effect on him. In terms of Shylock, we are incredibly lucky to have a fantastic actor from Macedonia called Ognan Drangovski playing the part of Shylock. And what we've discovered, what we've been working in during rehearsals is the way that Shylock uses language. And it sort of feels to us a little bit like some of the phrasing that he uses could be the kind of phrasing used by somebody who's not using English as a first language. When he's talking to, there's a particular moment where Shylock is talking to Bassanio, when Bassanio invites him to come to dinner. And he says, no, I won't eat with you. I won't eat pork. The habitation. He uses the word habitation in a way which feels kind of strange at the time. And you think, wow, this is someone who's being very careful with his choice of word. And it's either someone who's perhaps, used to choosing the right word in the right context, so he's not misinterpreted, which obviously fits the character of Shylock, who's perhaps working with contracts and deeds the whole time. Sort of has quite a legal brain, quite a sort of pedantic brain, but also somebody who is maybe not as confident with language, who's been quite thorough, quite thoughtful about the word he uses. And so obviously with Ognan, English is not his first language. And so we've been talking about using that to our strengths and to his strengths. So actually, make it part of the character itself, and that's been very, very interesting.